Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I am so pleased to have with us today Heidi Solomon-Orlick. Heidi has over 30 years experience in global sales and executive leadership. Today, she serves as Vice President of Global Sales for VXI Global Solutions, a $600 million multinational outsourcing company. She is also the founder and CEO of GirlzWhoSell, a company committed to closing the gender gap in B2B sales and building the largest pipeline of future female sales talent. We are so pleased to have with us on the podcast today, Heidi Solomon-Orlick. Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Simone. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm honored. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, so excited to hear more about your story. Well, this podcast, as you know, is about leaders being in the driver's seat for their careers. So give us a little backstory, if you will, on your journey to the driver's seat.
Wow. So this is going to be really cool going back a ways. I'm going to show my age, but I think I really got passionate about sales starting as early as, being on the, an alternate on the U.S. equestrian team. I rode horses my whole life and competed. And so I had this very competitive spirit very early on. In high school, my first job that I ever had was actually, and wow, this is going back, I don't even know if they're still in business, but working as a sales associate for Saks Fifth Avenue in the men's
they're still
department.
in business. I wonder if they are. Now you got me thinking, Heidi. I used to work there too, and I'm wondering. Okay, keep going.
Are they? Well, with what the retail industry has gone through this, past couple of years, I'm not sure. But I got to tell you, I worked in the men's department. It was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had. And the manager of the department was just a rock star at sales. He could work a fitting room like I have never seen anybody else. And so even then, I learned the foundation of sales. I after I graduated high school, went to the California State University, Northridge, got my degree in journalism and speech communications. I think I, had visions of being a broadcaster, but that didn't work, and decided to pivot and look at being a executive in advertising. And think about that. That was in the 80s. So talking about male domination, the advertising business today even still is male dominated. And then, I was definitely one of the only females at the table. It was my junior year of college, and I decided that I wanted to take a hiatus from school before I got my degree and get a job in an ad agency. And there was a woman that to this day is, probably had been one of the biggest influencers on my life. She probably doesn't even know it, but her name is Mary Wells, and she was one of the only, if not only, female CEOs in the ad agency business. And I wanted to work for her. I just did. So I picked up the phone and I called her, and I told her exactly what I wanted to do, and that I was really interested in getting an internship or some sort of entry-level position where I could learn about the ad agency business. And lo and behold, she hired me, even though I didn't even have my degree. And she took me under her wing, and I had the opportunity to work really closely with her for about a year. And I learned so much. And she just, when she walked in a room, she just lit up that room. Men admired her and women wanted to be her. And I was just in awe, because back then, and even still, there weren't very many female role models that, as women, we could emulate, right? So
I
I worked
love
there.
that story. If I could interject, I love that story. There's so many things that you're saying that I'm thinking about in terms of my journey with. I don't know, I don't think you know this, Heidi, because we just recently met, but I have an undergraduate degree in retail marketing. So
Okay.
I too, I had aspirations of really being in the retail space, becoming a buyer, and had to pivot when that didn't work. So I was really reflecting on your story and how you pivoted. And what I also admire about you sharing your journey is that uh, the courage to be fearless and getting control of your journey by picking up the phone. So bravo to you, and listeners, please take note, because it requires courage to be in the driver's seat for your career.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think myself and other women included, perhaps, who are listening, we tend to be perfectionists. We suffer from imposter syndrome. And so, I'm one that often feels as though I have to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. I think I had a little more courage, because I didn't even know what I didn't know when I was young. So I would just, there were things that I would do when I was younger that maybe I would have second thoughts about today. But I'm glad I did, because that was a milestone, or, a pivotal moment in my career that actually shaped the rest of what I've done.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, where does that courage come from? Was it with your upbringing, or just being very courageous in taking control?
I think the most influential person in my life was probably my father growing up. He was definitely one of the best salespeople. He was an entrepreneur. He owned his own company. And he always told me that if you don't ask, you don't get. And what's the worst thing that somebody can say is no, right? And so I thrived on overcoming the no
Mm.
and trying to just push through that. There's a famous quote by Wayne Gretzky that says, if you lose 100% of the shots that you don't take, right? And it's one of my favorite quotes, because I think it's true, and you just have to go for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So knowing what you know with your successful journey, again, the 30 years experience and just doing what you love, what would you say are the ingredients to successfully own your career from your point of view?
Yeah, I think if I were to encapsulate it in a single sentence, I would say, find your superpower and then stay the course.
Tell
Do
us a
not,
bit more about that.
yeah, so do not compromise who you are, especially as women in business, and perhaps in male dominated fields, which 30 years later, in the BPO industry is still male dominated, in doing B2B sales. So, don't try to be something that you're not, right? I read a lot of these business books, and they talk about how, as women, we should try to emulate men. And it just drives me crazy, because I am a true believer. And I think the reason I have been so successful in my career is because I did not try to be a man. I used my assets as a woman, not to sleep my way to the top, but to be a relationship builder and a problem solver, and to create solutions and add value to my client's business, so that I can help them move the needle and meet their goals. And so, for me, and it wasn't always easy. Let me tell you, there's a lot of pressure as a woman in business, particularly as you're making your way up leadership ranks, to compromise your personality. And I just never, I refused to do it. And I had a boss tell me once that I'm an acquired taste. So I was okay with that, because you either love me or maybe you don't. Frankly, I don't care, because I'm just going to be me. And the people that do really love me and support me and mentor me and have helped me be successful in my life and my career, they accept me for who I am.
What occurs to me, Heidi, is the confidence that is coming through in our conversation. And so I want you to talk to our listeners about how to build the skill of confidence, because I know when I had my time in corporate America, I've gotten feedback. I'm an introvert. And so I've gotten feedback from a manager to say, you don't have enough edge. And so I did feel like I had to morph to move in the organization. I felt that I had to get more edge. And by the way, to your point, Heidi, it doesn't work. So I got more edge, and then you've got too much edge. And so, so I wonder if you can give our listeners some strategies on how they can build their confidence. So when it's shaken, or they are approached by managers or other leaders who are saying they have to compromise who they are to be successful, what can they do to stand in their truth and be themselves?
Yeah, so I love that. And the fact that you're an introvert, it's interesting, because that is the foundation of Girls Who Sell. And frankly, although I've had a 30-year career, just to backtrack just a little bit, it really wasn't, when I look at my career defining moments, there were a lot of micro moments along the way. Actually, I guess it's 40 years if I include the 10 years in the ad agency business. So I went back, got my degree, and then actually worked in advertising until I fell into a career in sales. And, it included job changes and relocations and all those kinds of things. And then I'll get back to your question. But the defining moment for me really was at the end of 2019, well, the middle of 2019, I left my job as CEO as a company. My dad had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. My mother was suffering from heart failure, and they both subsequently passed away in November of 2019, within 10 days of each other, after 64 years of marriage.
Wow.
And it was devastating, absolutely devastating. Even though they were older, it shook my world. But what it also did was to force me to take a step back and reevaluate my priorities and what's important and what kind of legacy do I want to leave in the world. And so out of that, Girls Who Sell was born. And I realized that my passion, I had always mentored young women and helped develop and train other women in sales. But I decided that it was time for me to turn my passion into a movement and to close the gender gap in B2B sales, and to build the largest pipeline, diverse pipeline of women in sales. And a big part of Girls Who Sell, as we're developing our training curriculum, is this idea of confidence and this idea of finding their superpower. There's a lot of women I speak to, young women, who say, oh, sales isn't for me. I'm painfully shy. I'm an introvert. There is no way that I can be successful in sales. And I say, no, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. That is actually your superpower. So how do we look at your personality archetype and provide you with the confidence to bring that forward and leverage that so that you can be successful in a career in sales or just in life in general, right? And so I think that confidence is key. And whenever I talk to women who say, yeah, I've tried to, I was, I was either told that I was, too dominant, or I was too loud, or I asked too many questions, or I was too quiet and, didn't. I'm like, just use that, right? And so I think the key to building confidence is just being yourself. Does that make sense?
Well, I struggle with that, just to be honest. I struggle with that just a little, because I think you can be yourself and still be challenged with being confident. um for example, I'm a coach as well, and so one of the things that I will say to clients who are talking to me about confidence is, well, check out Toastmasters as a strategy, because Toastmasters builds up your communication and your leadership skills, and if you're able to present yourself confidently, you will feel more confident. So from a communications and leadership standpoint, build up that muscle, and then you can appear more confident. Even if you're not, you'll learn strategies to be more confident. So when you say to me, just be yourself, and that in itself will allow you to be confident, I struggle with that just a bit.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely a fair comment. And you just need to push through the fear. So
Mm,
and do it anyway,
mm,
right? And then when you Masters is a great program. I attended, and did some work with them early on in my career, but I do think that it starts with just recognizing who you are, and then from there putting yourself in situations that might stretch you, right, or challenge you. And once you get through that, it's terrifying, right? Like, let me tell you, when I launched Girls Who Sell and started to do, we just actually announced, I've been working on it for a couple of months, but we just announced the launch of the company last week, actually. And I thought I was going to throw up, right? Like I was just, oh my God, it's not perfect. And I don't have this totally completed yet, or that totally completed yet. And I decided just to push through the fear. So even at 61 years old, I'm still finding confidence every day, and learning and pushing my boundaries. So I don't know. I think putting yourself in situations that stretch you and trying to just push through it, because once you get to the other side, it's like, wow, I did that,
yeah.
right? And now that I did that, what's the next thing that I can do? If you don't put yourself in uncomfortable situations and push through the fear, then you won't grow. You won't evolve as a human
Absolutely.
being.
Absolutely. One of my very favorite books is by the late Susan Jeffers, and it's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
And do
And
it
it is
anyway.
such a wonderful book, because it talks exactly what you're talking about, Heidi, to really push through the fear. And listener, you may have heard me say in previous seasons of the podcast that I had to make the decision to leave corporate America, and I didn't have something lined up. And so it was a very fearful time for me, because culturally I'm taught to make sure you have the next job before you leave this job, and you have the security and the salary and benefits, etc. And so I left back in 2013, and I didn't have something lined up. But to your point again, Heidi, I had to push past the fear that, oh my gosh, I'm a failure. I don't have another job. I'm never going to find another job. All that language that I was wrestling with, I had to push through. And if I didn't push through, I wouldn't have my own business for 5 years now. I wouldn't be discovering all these new things and capabilities that I have. So completely agree with you, Heidi.
And congratulations for doing that, because I think there's the safety net of corporate is addicting, right? And so it is difficult to make those changes. So congratulations to you for doing that.
Oh, thank you so much. You mentioned previously, I was chuckling to myself because I work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And
Yeah.
one of the examples that I have used in my training is Ernst & Young recently, as far back as 2019, training women to be more like men in a leadership training class. So when you were saying that, I was chuckling to myself. But what I want to ask you about, Heidi, is you mentioned that you've been reading a lot of business books. So talk to us about some of the resources or books that you recommend to our listeners about how they can take ownership of their career.
There are a lot of good business books out there. And I think even Brene Brown is one of my favorite humans. You know, if your listeners have not listened to any of her TED Talks, or she's just a phenomenal human being. I love Oprah Winfrey. There's so many inspirational female leaders that I read their books. And you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but one of my favorite books is "Oh, the Places You'll Go" by Dr. Seuss.
I've heard other people say that.
It's one of the best business books and best sales books I've ever read, and I generally give it to each of the members of my team. I gave it to each of my children when they were born and personally signed it, and they keep it in their house and they reference it. And even today, as grown men, well, 25, 26, whatever, they're in their 20s. But even today still continue to reference that. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend it.
I have a copy of it, and I think I got it in a leadership course. I'm trying to remember if it was at the Disney Leadership Institute or if it was another training. I did a lot of training courses in my corporate days, and I still do a lot of training personally. When you say it's the best sales book, what makes you say it's the best sales book?
Because it's about, sales is up and down, right? And you face a lot of obstacles, and you get a lot of no's. You get a lot more no's than you do yeses. Sometimes you do everything right and you still don't get a deal. And that book is about life's up and downs and how you still need to persevere.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we'll be sure to add that to the show notes for your episode as well. So what advice would you give to our listeners about taking risk? Because you have mentioned, moving for work or starting a new company. And so it sounds like you've taken a lot of risk to pick up the phone and call someone that you don't know. It's pretty risky because, that rejection on the other side. So what advice can you give to us about being appreciative of risk to grow in our careers?
It's interesting you say that, because I actually have never thought of myself as a person that takes risk, right? I'm actually, in the way that I manage maybe my personal life more than my business life, tend to be a little bit more risk averse. But now that you say that, maybe I should think of myself in a little bit different context. But I think risk has to be calculated. And if you're going to, you can't be irresponsible in terms of taking risk. I'll give you an example of a calculated risk. When my husband is 9 years younger than I am. I know I robbed the cradle. And he's fabulous. But it was, well, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago now, he lost his job. And we were at a point in our careers. I was a vice president for a large company. I was making a lot of money and had a very successful career. I was traveling all over the world for my job. And we had relocated from Salt Lake City, Utah to back to Pennsylvania for his job. So, we career, he followed me to Salt Lake. I followed him back to Pennsylvania. And within 2 months of getting relocating back to Pennsylvania, he lost his job. And at the same time, we had a nanny that was helping us raise I have 3 kids. It was helping us raise our young children, or at least caring for them. And we sat down and just said, we're passing each other in airports. This is insane, right? And she got engaged to be married. And so she was going to leave us. And we made a calculated decision to have him be a full-time stay-at-home dad. Now, let me tell you, 18 years ago, that wasn't a thing, right? But, and we needed to make some very dramatic life changes. We put our house up for sale. We downsized. We changed our lifestyle so that we could afford to live on one income. And it was the best decision we ever made. First of all, to be honest, he was better at being a stay-at-home parent than I was. And as a woman, that's really hard to admit, but he did a fantastic job. His being able to take all of the minutia off of me allowed me to exponentially excel in my career. But that's an example of a very calculated risk, which some people may be listening thinking, that's just crazy. I can't believe she did that. But to me, it was like it made total sense to do that at the time. So you can't be irresponsible, but if you don't take risks, you don't grow.
Yeah,
you don't change.
Story. Yeah, thank you for sharing that example with our listeners. Absolutely. I said it when I was thinking about you moving to start your own venture now with GirlzWhoSell. So that's a big leap as well.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I haven't taken a full jump, right? So right now it's my side hustle. I still have, I work for a great company. I'm very blessed to have a fabulous job with VXI. But I still have that corporate safety net. So we'll see, in what time frame I just decide to take the full jump.
All right. Well, thank you for that. But as we begin to wrap up this episode, is there any parting advice that you have for our listeners? I think, just tying back is really find your superpower, and then just push through the fear and just go for it. And, find your path, find your true calling, and don't compromise. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Simone. I appreciate it.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.